Hello, welcome to this episode of the Financial Incline. I'm your host, John Bovard. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dave Knox. Dave is the Executive Director for Blue North, which is a Northern Kentucky-based community for entrepreneur, business owners, and founders that provides them with the mission-critical resources that they need to grow and scale their business. During our conversation, we get into Dave's background, from where he started at Procter & Gamble, to the many different positions he has held, to the businesses he has owned and invested in, and what resources are out there for those in the Cincinnati community that are looking to start a business, sell a business, or invest in a privately held company. During our conversation, we discuss the resources that are available for startup founders and also for those that are looking for entrepreneurship through acquisition. And lastly, in our conversation, we discuss what are some key characteristics that Dave looks for when he's looking to make an investment in a startup company, and also when he's looking to make an investment in a privately held business. So for those of you that are looking to start a business, invest in a privately held business, or if you're looking to pursue the role of entrepreneurship through acquisition, make sure you check out this conversation with Dave Knox. Hey, Dave, how's it going this morning?
It is going great. Thanks for having me.
That's good. So I appreciate you taking the time today. And for those that are watching the video, or if they're listening in, would you mind sharing just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, happy to. So my name's Dave Knox. I am the executive director for Blue North. Blue North is one of six what we call Kentucky innovation hubs, which we are exist to be a resource for startups and entrepreneurs that call Northern Kentucky home. Myself, I've been in the brand building and venture capital world for just over 20 years now. So started my career at Procter & Gamble, went to the digital agency side as a chief marketing officer for an agency called Rockfish that we ultimately sold to WPP. And then here in Cincinnati was also one of the co-founders of the Brandery Startup Accelerator that existed for 2010 through about 2018.
Yep. Yeah. Well, great. Well, great. So were a lot of those, and I see the roles on LinkedIn as well. So are a lot of these roles kind of overlapping with each other, or there's a start and a stop, or how did all that work?
Yeah, so I would say it was like branches of the tree is the best way to describe
Okay.
it. So from a very singular to what I kind of define now as the portfolio life that exists. So P&G was very linear, 2003 to 2010. The
Yep.
job was Procter and Gamble, and that was the company. But
Mm-hmm.
then Rockfish and the Brandery both happened in the summer of 2010. When I left P&G, the day job was Rockfish and opening that office up with a few colleagues. And then the nights and weekends was the Brandery and everything we were doing with working with startups there. Uh, Both of those kind of conveniently ended around the same time in late 2017 as our earnout ended with WPP and startup accelerators kind of changed their role in the ecosystem.
Yep.
And kind of call it 2018 onwards has been much more that portfolio life of being a venture investor, being on board of directors.
Yep.
Had a short stint with ETA where I bought a small consumer packaged goods company, and then now Blue North is the day job, but all those other uh, portfolios still exist and take up a decent chunk of time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Sounds like you're a busy guy, I'm assuming. So probably a lot of prioritization needs to be involved in your schedule, I can imagine. So
And it's if you want something done, ask the busiest person you know. So.
true, true. Well, good. So you definitely touched on a lot of different things. You started in the big corporation, then kind of transitioned to different startup roles, entrepreneurship through acquisition. So what would you say, if you were looking at someone, or if you knew someone that wanted to be a business owner, and they're pursuing the path of, hey, should I start my own thing? Should I maybe look for an existing business to buy? What are some of the kind of the differences between the two? And then maybe what are some of the pluses and the minuses to each approach?
Yeah, so one of the things I use that word founder to be something pretty special as it comes across the board. And it really, that word entrepreneur itself as well, because those are means you're putting a lot of it on the line. You are risking it to build something that there is no consistency when you look at all of those things. And I always say that while I've worked with entrepreneurs for a long, long time, it wasn't till probably 15 years into my career that I could call myself truly an entrepreneur. And that was, as I released my first book, Predicting the Turn, and left the confines of Rockfish, where it was on my shoulders whether or not we could pay the mortgage that month. It wasn't on the shoulders of my colleagues and the paycheck that I knew I was going to get that would enable that. So, and I say that because that's, one of the biggest differences that exists out there is, especially as we've started to celebrate entrepreneurs in a lot of different ways and they become more part of pop culture, if you will, that word needs to be still held in a pretty high special place in a lot of ways. So I talk about that. That's a big difference when you look at it. And then, when it comes to, starting something versus buying something, or frankly, joining something, it really is what type of person are you and what do you enjoy doing? And probably most importantly, what's the unfair advantage that you can bring to the business? I look at myself, I am much better at the go-to-market, the scale, and the growth because of networks and connections and just how I have built my 2 decades of business relationships. The 0 to 1's not my strength. The 1 to 10 is my strength and the part I really kind of enjoy.
Yep.
There are others that love the 0 to 1 and frankly get bored once it's time to start doing the growth once the start has already happened. So it's about identifying yourself and what do you enjoy, and none of them, are right or wrong. And frankly, those can also change during time periods of life. You might love the start in your 20s and 30s, but once the kid and the family responsibilities come along, the growth might be more interesting for the balance.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely that huge uplift, like you said, from going 0 to 1. You're battling getting the word out. You're trying to really take something, get it off the ground. That huge lift that you have. So what are then some of the benefits of acquiring an existing business? Like what would be someone that might be well suited for that, or what are some of the things that could lead to better results for people if they were to acquire a business?
Yeah, so when you look at the acquiring a business, you'll hear the term ETA tossed around quite a bit. So entrepreneurship through acquisition, and that was a space I really only discovered myself. I'd call it in 2018, really, where I knew of people that had bought businesses, but I never thought of it as, lack of a better term, an asset class or a vehicle that you could treat in the same way that people treated startups and venture capital or other areas. So, when you look at those, the advantages can be pretty numerous. One, so that my own personal journey, I ended up buying a business that was almost about 10 years old. And it was a natural pain relief cream. And, that was a business that when I looked at it and ended up purchasing it, one advantage immediately was they had the product. Somebody had come up with this idea, had figured out the formula, had actually gotten a patent around the recipe and the ingredients and everything else, and had already gotten some distribution. They'd gotten it into, in this case, into Tractor Supply. That's one big difference is you've got some momentum. There is something there that you can build off of. And for me, then my secret power that I was able to bring into it was I'd spent time at Procter and Gamble working in our personal health care and OTC.
Hmm.
So I had a good sense of what were the things that we needed to fix in that business. And if we fix them, what could be the next stage of growth that it could get us to? And so I was able to go in and rebrand and make the package look different. I was able to go get a better supply chain with our manufacturing partners. And doing those things allowed us to then go pitch Walmart and pitch Wegmans and pitch others.
Hmm.
Um, but having that starting point is a really big advantage that comes with it.
Yeah.
The correlation and other part that gets interesting with it is when you're purchasing something, that means there's also a foundation,
Yeah.
and that foundation gives you optionality.
Right.
One optionality is it's actually making money so you can afford to pay yourself or
True.
put the money back into growth.
Right.
Um, that's a pretty big advantage in a lot of
Mhm.
different ways.
Yes.
But it also opens up options for how you pay for acquiring the business.
Mhm.
Because if it's a business that is a real business, which means it makes real profits, you can use tools like an SBA 7A to finance it.
Right.
Or you can use seller financing. You can use other things that just aren't at your disposal financially when you're creating and doing just a pure startup.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's great. And I completely agree with you. You know, if the infrastructure is there, if the cash flow is there, if the some of the marketing is already there, it can definitely be a much easier lift and easier scale to profitability, right? Like you'd mentioned. So you mentioned the brandery and a lot of and even what you're doing now at Blue North. So if there are people in the area, what resources are available, in our Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky area to startup founders, entrepreneurs, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really special about this, I use the word ecosystem overall. So we kind of, in the world of entrepreneurship venture, we call it Startup Cincy. That's kind of
Okay.
the rallying cry that exists across the board. And we're really fortunate in Startup Cincy that we have a community that is there for the betterment of entrepreneurs and a support network that I think sometimes we frankly take for granted versus other cities of what we have from a built-in.
Hmm.
Um, so with that, really the two places I always start are with Blue North and with Centrifuge.
Yeah.
Um, so Centrifuge was launched over a decade ago now, really to build on the momentum of what was going on with Over the Rhine and the broader ecosystem. So they exist as an entrepreneurial support organization for high growth entrepreneurs that want to go after venture capital, et cetera. They also have a physical space called Union Hall that exists in OTR. And
Hmm.
then they also have Centrifuge Capital that is a vehicle for direct investments into startups and into what's called a fund to fund model, which is into other venture capital funds.
Yeah.
So Centrifuge is the first, great resource. They run Startup Cincy Week and a bunch of other great stuff.
Hmm.
Um, Blue North is an equivalent for those that call Northern Kentucky home. And that means either a founder that's based in Northern Kentucky because they live there, or somebody that chooses to work there. And so we're applying a different model. We partner very closely with Centrifuge to provide that same sort of entrepreneurial support system. We also have a physical building that will be launching next July called Spark House. That is a reimagining of the old Sims furniture in Montgomery Ward that's in the heart of Covington.
Yep.
So those are two great resources, that collaborate very closely together, and we're each leveraging, let's say, some of the dollars available from the states to take advantage of what we can do to build greater Cincinnati as a whole.
Yeah.
You also have some amazing other resources. Alloy is the old Hamilton County Business Development Center um, that does some really great stuff through their growth lab. The universities all have some really unique and special programs, both for their students, but also for the community at large. So you've got Northern Kentucky University with their
Yep.
CIE, their Center for Innovation Entrepreneurship. You have Miami University, which, I'm a proud alum of, is the seventh ranked entrepreneurship program in the country.
Wow.
And then you have UC with their 1819 facility as well, that is doing some really neat stuff.
Right.
So we're fortunate, have a whole host of resources, and those are all at the general level. You can also get into very specific, like if you are a food and beverage entrepreneur, you can tap into things like Incubator Kitchen and a new
Wow.
program they have called Good and Local that is specifically for supporting emerging consumer packaged goods startups. So we have all kinds of things like that and resources.
Hmm. Yeah, that is. I've been very impressed with what's out there, with what you can find. It doesn't take if you've ever attended Cincy Startup Week, typically in October down there at Union Hall. I mean, you can just see a lot of great energy. That week in and of itself is a great time for anyone that's looking at startups, looking at ETA, really looking at where businesses are going in the future. This year there was a lot of AI conversation. In and yeah, it seems like the big corporations in the city are pretty heavily involved with helping the startup ecosystem as well.
Yeah, very much so, that's another one that's pretty unique. Is it's rare that you have Fortune 500s leaning in to
Yep.
build the community as much as we do in this town. So it's a
Mhm.
great advantage for a lot of different companies and startups across the board.
Yes, yes. And so shifting back to the ETA model, right? The
Yeah.
entrepreneurship through acquisition. With most people, so first question would be one, are there resources out there for people that are looking to do that? And then two, it seems like yeah, the $1 million question is where do I find a business, right? Seems like deal flow. If you can have deal flow, you can survive and you can find opportunities. But for most people, it seems like it's very difficult to go about doing that. So, are there resources you know of locally? And then two, what would your advice be for somebody that may be looking? Um,
Yeah, for sure. So you start with the ETA. As I mentioned earlier, it is a relatively newer term that kind of
mhm.
exists out there. So
Yep.
the content is not as wide and far as you might find with other verticals, but that's changing. So the first thing I always encourage for anybody that's looking is build your foundation before you dive into the local resources. So tap into the content that's available nationwide to really bring yourself up to speed with, what's the type of ETAs out there, what are the best practices, what are the resources, et cetera. Um, so, there's some great books. I started my journey reading, Buy Then Build
Yep.
by Walker Deibel, which you'll hear a lot.
Hmm.
HBS has a really good book on just simply buying a small business.
Yes.
So
Right.
you can start with those. Several of the top tier MBA programs, so Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Booth, and Kellogg, they have a lot of content around it because ETA has become a pretty popular track, I think, for MBA students that before might have gone to Wall Street and then gone to Silicon Valley. Now they're looking at ETA as another big trend.
Right.
So start your journey with looking at all of those and kind of starting that. Once you've done that, that's where we have things like Cincy ETA. We launched Cincy ETA about 18 months ago, 20 months ago now,
Mhm.
really as a local resource to bring folks that were, I'd call it ETA curious, into the mix to meet each other.
Yeah.
It was a group that was really inspired because, somebody that had done an ETA business, I ended up having coffee with, 10, 12, 14 different people that were all in similar journeys, similar phases. And we realized that we were all meeting each other eventually, but it took 14 hours of coffees instead of getting together at a single event.
Right.
So that's what Since ETA was founded to. You can go find out more information just at nice and simple, Cincy with a Y, ETA.com. So go visit that site. You can sign up for the events. And what we do is a mixture of networking events where you can just meet each other and then content events that you can hear about others' journeys with ETA. And why that's important is ETA, there are different types. There are people that are actively doing a search, and actively doing a search might be a self-funded search. It might be a search fund where they've raised money and the clock is ticking because of that. You might find people that have done an ETA deal and now they're an owner that is trying to grow this business. You might find ETA investors, which is more the bucket I fall under these days. And then you'll just find ETA curious that just, this is intriguing. I heard somebody talk about it on a podcast and I want to go learn what this thing is.
Right.
So getting involved, that's a great local resource that we're just getting going. We still have a lot of work to do with it, but I think we're over 100 members now that are part of that community. And then, you can also tap into other local resources. Like there are, the business brokers that are managing deals that you can always go look and see what businesses they have. And then some of the service providers do some really interesting content. I think it was last year that First Financial, and I believe it was Von Lehman, did a 4-part series that was on, acquiring a business. And they didn't necessarily use the words ETA, but they said, acquiring a small business, et cetera, those type of words as well that pop up.
Yes. Right. Yeah, those are all great resources. I can definitely vouch for the ETA group. Putting all of those people in the same room, and everyone I've seen from that has pretty much had a different background too. Whether it be people leaving a big corporation, people still at a big corporation, people with at investment banking type firms, or just those independent sponsors out there that are looking to jump in. And then you're right, you have the investor group, and then you have the people that are looking to be operators as well. So really
no
good
doubt.
question.
Yeah. Well, and to your second part of your question of like, how do you find the business? Part of that is why it's just the networking for stuff like that. There is no easy way to go off and find the businesses and find that match. It is a lot like dating. It's how do you find your significant other? It's not an easy process across the board. So that's where we hope, since ETA can be that resource. And as you bring in service providers and you bring in those that are part of that ecosystem, because you never know when somebody is going to be talking with their attorney or their accountant or their wealth manager and say, I'm thinking about, retiring or getting out of the business in 6 months or a year. That's where a lot of this stuff starts, and where a lot of the networking takes place.
Yeah. Perfect. So in your own personal journey with ETA, with the consumer goods product that you had, what were some of the things that you learned through that process?
Yeah. So, I think there are, we could spend 2 hours on the lessons learned across the board.
Right. Yep.
But, for me, there was a few different things. And it's why I ultimately decided to, as I call it, hand the baton off to the next owners of the business to take the journey. Really understanding that as you grow, the capital required to grow and what choices it might lead you to need to make because of that is something you almost need to plan for that success day one. So you know what you're dealing with down the road. And, our example of that was we had an opportunity that we got into Walmart and CVS and these big national retailers, which is a great success, but it also comes with a lot of capital working capital, a lot of inventory that's tied up, payment terms that aren't negotiable. Walmart doesn't care what size you are. Like, their terms are their terms.
Yes.
And knowing that and thinking about that up front, what that's going to be, and really what's required for it. That was one part of the, kind of my own journey as I looked at it.
Right.
Also was, really having a sense of when you get to success, what do you want that success to look like? How big do you want to build the team? Is that what you want to build? Do you want to be on the road at, trade shows and other things? Because that's how your business is done. or do you want to be able to stay more local? So it's almost looking at not just what business excites you when you make the acquisition,
Hmm.
but what are the buckets that are going to be able to be things you have to consider down the road.
Yep.
That's one that I probably didn't think about enough as I went into it,
Yep.
because I found a great deal that was super interesting and I kind of jumped straight in
Yeah.
without maybe thinking about some of those things down the line.
Right. Right. No, those are great. Obviously great learning experiences, and with me having a little bit of experience, you know, selling those, distributing those goods and wholesaling products. Yeah, I can tell you there's a lot that goes into it from on the manufacturing side as well. Who are your suppliers? Who are your manufacturers? And then, like you mentioned, inventory. Where do you inventory it at? Do you hire a 3PL, third party logistics company to ship it? Do you ship it in house? And then yes, obviously meeting the demands of the big retailers.
Yeah.
A lot of it is you're at their mercy, which can be good and bad. If they try to talk you down on price, or if you need price increases, if you're getting price increases from your suppliers, and how do you pass that on to your customers? So yes, definitely a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. Well, and also, especially if you're coming from a big company, if you will,
Hmm.
don't overestimate your expertise and what your teammates might have been doing, because you don't have teammates in a lot of cases.
True.
Like I joke that I was 20 years in consumer packaged goods. I never knew where barcodes came from, and that there's a company called GS1 that actually did those and made those. And you
Right.
thought about your
Hmm.
inner packs and your case counts and your pallet. Like,
Yes.
there is, just because you have one part of that experience doesn't mean you've got the full picture of everything that goes into it.
Right.
And it's not a reason not to jump into it, but don't overestimate your own background, uh, unless you have truly been the load bearing wall across the board for that entire business.
Hmm.
Um, because in the big companies, you've had a lot of resources that you might not have realized day to day what they were doing to make the business easier, but they were there day to day helping you make the business easier.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the buck stops with you, right? I mean,
Yep.
everything is now on your plate when you're the business owner. So,
Yeah. And what's that mean for you on the life standpoint? That you want to take a week long vacation. Guess what? That's tough to do when you're the load bearing wall. Um,
yes. Right.
so
True. Well, good. And so a couple of the things I wanted to touch on with you as well is, for right now, if you kind of put your investor hat on, right? So, a lot of it, what we've talked about is being the founder, being the entrepreneur, being the operator. If you were to look at it from, an investor standpoint, in first starting with startups, um, how would you tend to communicate to potential investors? Obviously startups need capital. A lot of times they might be burning through a lot of cash, to get the company up and running. So how do you find yourself coaching entrepreneurs through that conversation with potential investors? And addressing some of those fears from investors, like when will I see a return on my money? Will you guys give out any distributions, dividends? Those types of things if the company's not profitable yet. How do you kind of coach up your entrepreneurs on that?
yeah, so I think a lot of it comes down to, just because somebody has the money that they can invest doesn't mean that they're right to be a startup investor. Um,
Yep.
be investing in a high growth company is a very unique part of somebody's portfolio. And it should be a part of a portfolio, not an overwhelming portion,
Yep.
because it is an illiquid asset.
Right.
For the most part, especially if you're investing at an early stage for a startup, you're talking an 8 to 12 years likely before a liquidity event is going to happen.
Yep.
That's a reason that venture capital funds themselves are 10-year vehicles that are almost always extended as a vehicle for when the return happens,
Right.
because it's the nature of the beast. Now, with that same token, there are very few, if any, vehicles elsewhere in the world that can create 10, 20, 50, 100x returns
Right.
um, that allow you to play in those. So there are massive pros and there are massive cons that go into it.
Yeah.
And so I think the first thing is somebody just understanding you need to know that. And you need to know, how are you thinking about it? What's the assumption? The assumption should be that the dollar is going to go to zero, because in order to have a beta that is high,
Yeah.
to have a beta that's a 10x return means the beta is also more likely to go to zero than it will get to 10x.
Right. Right.
So that's kind of first that. And if somebody's not comfortable with that, you shouldn't try and force them into it. You're just gonna, on both sides, cause a mess of a behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of number one. I think then the second is understanding that it is portfolio. There's a reason a venture capital fund doesn't invest in just 5 companies. An
Right.
average venture fund is doing 25 to 40 companies usually in a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same way that somebody should be thinking about with being an angel investor or being an investor in a startup. Is you need a basket. And
Yeah.
I believe, this number is not going to be exactly right, but you need about 30 investments as an angel investor
Mm-hmm.
in order to get to a diversified enough portfolio that your returns are going to be above what you would get just by doing a stock market portfolio,
Right.
and get
Right.
that appropriate mixture.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you might get lucky. We all know the person that's done one investment and that happened to be the one that worked,
Right. Right.
because no one talks about the ones that failed in
The
that.
five. Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
so
Right.
you need that diversification, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody's going to give you different opinions. My own journey as an angel investor, I've found that it's best to just be consistent with the size of your investments,
Mm-hmm.
because every time I went higher than my norm was the time that company screwed up and didn't work out.
Yeah.
And every time I went lower was the time it was the company that worked.
Right.
So being consistent is being really good.
Mm-hmm.
And finding a way to get your toe in the water. How can you get experience doing this?
Right.
That can be investing in a venture capital fund as one first thing. Um, that's a great way that, if you invest $100,000 into a venture fund, you're really getting a chance to invest in, call it, $5,000 in 20 companies at least.
Right.
That's a really good way. And that's worth, paying the 2% management fee or the 20% of carry to
Mm-hmm.
get that diversification right off the bat.
Right.
Or start going and using the new tools that exist. Things like Angel List and Sidecar. You can do investments as low as $1,000 or $2,000.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to get the practice of, what are you looking for? What's the type of investments? And if you can do 20 investments at $1,000 each,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, none of those is going to hit and make you rich by any means,
Right.
but you can build your own comfort, and then you can be a lot more comfortable when you're ready to go up to 10,000 or 25 or 50,000 even per investment,
Mm-hmm.
because you've gotten the practice in. It's just like sports, if you're not hitting the batting cages, it's going to be awfully tough to hit that ball in the game.
Right. Right. No, that's a great analogy, and that's really great advice, because I've had one-off deals that have come across my desk for potentially for clients, and there's people that I know that aren't familiar with venture investing, and they might be asking me about it and looking for advice on it. So obviously there's no silver bullet right answer to this, but from the experience that you've had, what has been common characteristics or traits that have separated the winners from the losers? Like, what are some takeaways you've had from this?
Yeah. So for me, it all comes down to founders, and it comes down to the people. every time, and this goes back to our time at the Brandery and all the startups that went through the program, every time we bet on the market or the product or the potential, it ended very badly.
Yeah.
But every time we bet on the people, that's when it worked out.
Yeah.
Because that's the constant, or it should be the constant that stays with the company over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And you find different ways to decide what makes sense, kind of across the board. You know, some people have a mindset of, a certain founder they're looking for. I have things that I personally really enjoy. One, I love, if you've got a background as a D1 athlete,
Mm-hmm.
I've had really good success with that, because that is somebody that's generally had to balance performing at the highest levels, if you will,
Right.
but also doing it while being a student and getting through grades. And this sounds weird to say it this way, but particularly those D1 athletes in the non-sexy sports.
Yeah. Right.
If you're choosing to be a D1 tennis player, you're
Mm-hmm.
probably not doing it because you think you're going to win the Grand Slam.
Right.
Versus, that same in basketball or football, you do have a path of professional sports that can be that next thing.
Right.
But D athletes in the tertiary sports, I mean, not a nice way to say it, but the secondary thing there can
Mm-hmm.
be really interesting. And I think if I look at least two of my best investments, that's been the model of the founders.
Yeah.
A lot of similar people have a viewpoint of veteran entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
That if you've been able to get to the Naval Academy or West Point or others, you've learned things about drive, but you've also learned things about leading a team and getting people rallying around a common mission and a common goal.
Right.
So looking at those backgrounds, super important. Second for me is coachability. And maybe this goes back to that D1 aspect as well.
Mm-hmm.
That coachability doesn't mean that you're listening to everything that somebody's telling you. But it is that you're listening to all the different opinions that are coming around, and you're deciding which one is advice and how you're going to apply that. Versus the founders that think they know that's what's right and that's what they go after. That is a dangerous kind of path. And there's a famous Nick Saban quote that's around that, of how, good athletes think about things and how great athletes think about things. And it all comes down to coachability. That the great founders want to be told what's real, and they want to be told to their face. And they're going to listen, and they're not going to argue, but they will have strong opinions on different things. And that's super important. So I kind of look at that as a second super important thing. And then the third, and this is more just for me personally, but I really love founders that are scratching an itch, and there's a personal drive behind their mission. That somebody that's tackling a market opportunity because they see a big trend, I see that AI is going to do this, and that's why I want to jump into this. The former consultant mindset of I'm analyzing a market and tackling it. I find those rarely work because those people have much better options financially than doing the rat race that is a startup and as an entrepreneur. Being able to say, this is too hard, and I'm just going to go back to that corporate job that pays me $250,000 is a lot easier. But somebody that is tackling it because it's a personal pain point they have, a family member is affected by something that drives that motivation in a different way, that means when the going is really, really tough, you're not just going to throw in the towel. That's something I love, and it's some of the founders I respect the most, is those that are driven by that versus driven by the financial upside or potential.
Right. No, those are some great points. I mean, Sounds like there's no way, no silver bullet to defining it, but you just gave a great path there. So some great characteristics, a great outline for what you should be looking for. And then, are there any? So when looking to invest in an existing business, private business, and you have your same thing, you kind of have your investor hat on. Any good characteristics there to be looking for? Obviously you can evaluate things like the income statement, balance sheet, prior sales that are there. Anything kind of out of the ordinary or in addition that you would add that have led to good success?
Yeah, all the things I just described all stand true with
Okay.
those. But then I'll add a second that, I think is less for early stage and is more for either existing business or growing businesses. Let's say somebody that is at that later stage of venture or others is asking the question, why me?
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is, why is this ending up on my desk to evaluate and look at? Because a lot of times, unlike public companies, the data can be skewed and you might not be getting the full picture of a private company that's coming your way. And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Right.
And if you're looking and saying, well, this is a no brainer, why hasn't anybody else done this? There's probably a reason no one else has done this. And so, why is it ending up on your desk? And why are you the one fortunate enough to get it?
Hmm.
Um, in private investments, we'll hear terms of proprietary deal flow. And why did that deal fall on your desk and end up in your inbox? There could be a good reason. It could be, your wealth manager was college roommates with the founder, and that founder is looking to get some friendly dollars in before the next raise.
Hmm.
That's perfectly acceptable.
Right.
Um, but if it's a growing startup in New York and you're the one lucky enough to get an allocation, you should probably be asking yourself, why is it ending up on your desk in, Cincinnati or Northern Kentucky when you have no connections to the company?
Right. Right. Yeah. Makes complete sense. So, um, well, Dave, I really appreciate the time. Very insightful information that you've shared for those out there, for business owners, for entrepreneurs that are, looking at getting some advice, or people that may be wanting to be an entrepreneur or a business owner. Appreciate all of the information that you shared today. For those that are interested in connecting with you, I know you mentioned the Cincy ETA site or getting in touch with Blue North. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So pretty much any social channel, just at Dave Knox. I'm luckily enough old enough in the digital marketing world that I was able to claim most of the URLs. So,
Yes.
at Dave Knox on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. Also, just shoot me an email at dave@bluenorthky.com. Would happy help anybody in their journey of navigating any of the resources across Cincinnati, whether or not that's for startups or since ETA or any other bucket there. And if you're a business owner that's thinking about, I might want to sell my business, how do I connect with people? There's a lot of great people in the since ETA community that
Mhm.
confidentially we can help connect people with, because it is a pretty sensitive when you're starting to think about maybe selling your company.
Right.
Um, you've got to have trusted resources that can help make some subtle connections for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. Well, Dave, appreciate the time today.
Hey, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.